Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We want to thank you for joining us. My name is Kishore Vallabhneni, and I'm part of the sales team here at Sparity. And I have the distinct pleasure of presenting the webinar on cyber threats against banking and financial organizations and mitigation, along with Jeff Surratt, who heads our cybersecurity practice at Sparity. He will be sharing his views on the importance of cybersecurity in financial organizations. Jeff has over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, divided between both public and private sectors. He has worked in NCIS, including criminal counterintelligence, force protection, supply chain risk, and collaboration with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Before joining Sparity, he was heading the global architecture team, advising multi-international tenants, multi-international clients for CenturyLink. Hey, Jeff, welcome on board.
Thank you, Kishore. Nice to see you. Nice to be here for everybody. It's about 4 a.m. here in Japan, so.
So just before we get started, I just wanted to request all of you to post your questions as part of the chat window, so we can go through all your questions towards the end of this webinar. Moving along to who we are is Sparity has been a decade-old company headquartered in Atlanta, with centers in Denver, Australia, and India. We primarily provide services in the areas of digital transformation, data and analytics, cloud and infrastructure, along with security services, which is horizontal across all the different groups. We are a nimble organization and work on several different models, from onshore, nearshore, and offshore, along with different engagement models as well. With that, I think we would like to get started onto the webinar for which all of you are here. Let's get started on today's webinar. Jeff, could you please give us your view and insight into what's happening in the banking and financial organization from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yes, Kishore, and again, welcome everybody to this presentation. Before we actually get into banking and finance, I just want to go over some recent information as far as things go in the US and in general in cybercrime worldwide. So the most important takeaway from this slide is the fact that cybercrime generates about $1.5 trillion a year. If you compare that to nations, that means that cybercrime would be the 13th largest country in the world by GDP. And this very well reflects that cybercrime is now a business. It's no longer little teenagers in their rooms, trying to get into something and see what can happen. Not only is it a real business, it is also process-led business, meaning there are different verticals inside cybercrime itself. And every activity they perform, every crime that happens is a result of careful planning and reconnaissance that happened in advance, just like if it was a nation-state actor. So far in 2020, there have been 108 breaches to financial institutions, with 101 million records lost. Incidents against healthcare, education, healthcare, 113. And of course, with the race for the COVID vaccine, there have been 2 ransomware attacks for COVID-19 research within the US itself. And in general, about 525 reported incidents in healthcare. The most staggering aspect of this is that of all the 165 million records total that have been lost, 97% of those records have been in the United States. And owing to this fact is is the way COVID has fallen out, the way business has fallen out, is many organizations have not done their due diligence for, say PCI DSS or HIPAA. Everything has been deferred. And as of just last week, only 36.7 of the companies who are required to do PCI DSS, and this is in the world, not the US, have reported doing so. And we're going to talk about some of the fourth quarter issues coming forward, but also not on this slide deck is the fact that 161% of businesses are entirely behind on any type of compliance. So continuing with the theme of what's going on in 2020, these three graphs here pretty much will show you that it's not business as usual for us in cyber. I can remember two and a half years ago when I was still with NCIS, you wouldn't see anything like cybercrime being in the 80% range of what's going on now. In the last 2 years, it has completely flipped. So we are no longer focusing on nation states so much as it is cybercrime. And you can see here in the right-hand side chart about the targets. You can see financial sector is, if you take it on itself, is not that huge. But if you look at finance, insurance, FinTech, and then the multiple industries, the large red, could mean anything. So take it with a grain of salt that right now, cybercrime against banking and finance puts banking and finance in the number 2 slot, no longer the number 1 slot. And healthcare has taken it over as of June for number 1. The good news, having said all that, is that banking and finance is far ahead than any other industrial silo as far as detection, recovery, and response. So average 21 days to detect a hack inside FinCEN or inside any type of financial organization, 76 days to contain, and 3.89 million, not a good number, but that's the amount lost if it's not detected in time to prevent a breach. Compare the 21 days with well over 37 days and 76 days with nearly 198 days for multiple other industries. The loss, unfortunately, is still going to be about the same depending on the number of records breached. But the focus here is just to give you an idea of how things are going. Let's hope it stays this way. And focus on the trend and not as much as the emerging threats. Just to put all this in perspective, this is how 2020 is shaped so far as business, social, etc. I already said that healthcare was number 1 just by a couple percent. So it is represented here as the major events in healthcare, not the minor events in healthcare. But unfortunately, the major events in business, mostly in finance and insurance, far outweigh and as far as the incident scale and not the loss scale. One thing to point out here is that Capital One is listed, but it was Capital One Asia that was actually hit. Not going to say who, but someone on this chart is actually hit for the 5th time just a month ago. So that's the 5th time over 7 years. But moving along.
All right. Jeff, thank you for sharing those facts and figures. They are really disturbing. It makes me realize the importance of having an updated program which is relevant to the cyber threats that are current for all the banking and financial organizations, and the need to safeguard the cybersecurity threats. You mentioned an interesting observation regarding the increased use of internet banking and electronic databases network technology. Better connectivity also increases exposure to possible cybersecurity threats. Could you talk about the threat avenues that the changing business models are pushing all the banks and financial institutions and its impact?
Yes, sure. Moving on. So what I have here is a very simplified list of devices and access points that we'll see in more detail on the next slide. But the important thing to know is that you have internal risks and external risks, just like any other business. And the additive effect of what we call flattening the network, meaning a lot of people are working from home, has caused the introduction of one component that you didn't have before as far as external, and that is family. And this actually plays a big role in some of the most recent hacks, especially even the one with healthcare in the United States that actually originated in somebody's own PC, their own email. So you're extending the attack surface out and actually adding to your endpoints that need to be protected or considered. And the other thing too is the Wi-Fi network at home is going to be shared most likely across students going to school, people doing normal things, and you trying to work. So keep those considerations in mind. So looking at this and using these models, again, it's very simplified. You have company A working from home and the people on Wi-Fi. They get the email, and I put the email in company B outside of a box on purpose. They get an email or they send an email to the employee in company B. Or they have direct connectivity to a data storage at company B because they're a third-party supplier. Either way, there is potential for them to impact company B. So person reads email, opens the, in this case, PDF file, infects the system, and then it could also expand to other users who are working from home. Now, I purposely didn't put any arrows on this because it could go either way. That email could easily have come from company B to home user of company A, or it could have gone from the undescribed people with using their Wi-Fi with multiple devices. Working from home is about building up defenses, and a lot of people, a lot of organizations didn't have time to do so. So it rose about 60%, along with the sharp intake with ransomware attacks in February. March and April continued to advance. The number of domains that are registered that are COVID related continue to increase. I actually stopped counting after we crossed over 70,000 several months ago. And so all of this is to give you an idea of how you would present, how you would talk about expanding your defense in depth model. And this also leads into the next slide, which talks about the cyber kill chain. So you have the person who's going to attack ransomware usually, who's already done the recon, they've already done the prep. If you go back to the history lesson we have with nation states, is the databases are already out there. Information on the dark web's already out there. You're already posting way more information than you probably should, as am I, on Facebook. And so they already have a general idea of what they want, how much they want, and where to attack. So the first point of correction could happen when the user is receiving that email. So that phishing email is out. It's already crossed. It's already in your email server. That is the first point where something could have happened. That spam phishing email could have been detected and put in file 13. but let's pretend like it didn't. So it moves on, and the user actually opens it, and they gain access to the employee's corporate machine and records. Now, actually, in reality, for many attackers, this is where it's going to stop. They're going to wait 3 days to see what may or may not happen from the organization. And, don't quote me exactly on 3 days. They're going to wait average of 3 days to see what happens before moving forward. So here we have a protection point that could exist, number 2, right behind number 3, where the login, in this case, in a cybercrime, will usually happen after hours, not during hours. It'll be many hours before or many hours after normal business. So this would be a point where something happens, user's already logged off for the day, has been logged off. If you have detection for user access and denial, then this would be your warning point number 2. So HR person has access to databases and other things. So this is the internal recon. So I'm here. Where can I go from here? That means they could move over to 5, which is lateral movement, and impersonate the HR employee and continue the infection. Also means they could stay there and scan networks. Either way, you move into the lateral movement section. And this is pretty much the last point where any device, any threat intelligence will be able to stop what's about to happen. So they execute their payload, and keep in mind, if this is a ransomware as a service, then the malware infection has brought in some other form of execution payload, executed. Now the ransomware is taken over, and they've got your information, and you've moved on to number 9. And this is where you negotiate, and or if you have minute-to-minute backups, you could actually just ignore it, shut everything down, reboot back to steady state.
Thank you, Jeff. This gives us a better appreciation for what banks and financial organizations need to do and associated environmental risk. What is your perspective on the threat actors and the type of attacks for the banks and financial organizations?
Certainly, sure. So I have picked 4 out of the, I don't know how many now, 169 available malware. The first one I want to talk about is EventBot, because we're talking about finance, we're talking about banking, and I've already said that it's gone 60% mobile. So many of the banking and malware threats that are coming on board are going to be mobile focused. In this case, we're going to focus on Android in every step. So EventBot actually came out very early stages in March, April timeframe. Not to say that it wasn't before, but it was mainly detected in those areas. And it actually caused, if you remember the opening chart where I showed, what's been going on in this year, some of the banks that popped up on my list were actually popping up because of EventBot. So right from the get-go, they attacked 200 different financial applications in mobile banking, money transfer service, and cryptocurrency wallets. It only targets financial institutions, and that was in United States, Europe, and Australia. And I'm pretty sure I'm here in Japan. If I started doing some digging here, that it would probably come to here too, especially since we already know that Capital One was actually in UK and here as well. Again, I already mentioned that the analysis shows that the network foothold exists for 33 days before any prior execution. Again, this is for recon and analysis to see where it might be directed to go next. And the initial process is pretty much like I described when we were going through the kill chain. So the only difference is this is a application that is going to come from the Google Play Store. So when that person clicks that email on their phone, the first thing it's going to do is try to download some of the malware surreptitiously, and or we'll show you the list later, they have gone and downloaded this on their own, thinking it was valid. So it will get control, and it will turn on your accessibility features without you knowing, by muting the alarms and warnings that you may have gotten. It will do reconnaissance on your phone, and actually check the library on your phone for all types of Android packets to see what's available. Collection. So you're doing your banking information, or you're logging in to check your policy for your car, and it's recording everything you're doing, keystrokes, personal data, passwords, and then it takes all that data and exfiltrates the collection data to its C2 server. However, it will only do it if you're connected to Wi-Fi. And at the same time as doing all this, it is collecting your SMS messages. So when you have two-factor authentication, like I do to some of the banks over here, they know it, they know my device, but they're still going to say, oh, okay, you tried to log in, we're going to send you a text message with a code. So it's recorded that code, could actually log in without you even knowing it happened. Likewise, if you use any other type of like trading software that's on your bank, the first time you go in and you set those up, to avoid annoying you and have you log in multiply, it gives you a PIN code that you could use if you were using a known device. So it'll record that PIN code, so it could actually log into your trading app for you, and make mobile sales. Like the other one, we have Emotet. Emotet is a malware as a service, meaning it's a rent-a-tool, basically. And in this case, Emotet is out there to make money for both. Remember, I said that this has become more of a business. So this is basically the person wanting to execute against an organization is renting time. And by renting time, whatever their make is on the entire sale, say it is the $3.89 million, whatever they get paid, they have to pay 30% of that to the people renting them, Emotet and the bots, and they keep the rest. Now, if there's another successful breach using the same, two organizations, then that number will go down. So, may start at 60-40, may go to, 70-30. Doubtful it goes past 70-30 because they never get past the second. And this is actually reconfigurable. So this is why it's reached 16% of all the financial Trojans, and this is as of the beginning of September. It will actually slightly become polymorphic, meaning that it can recognize the type of device that it's running on. It can recognize the type of email that's being used, and the secondary payloads that it sends, for the crimeware itself is highly configurable. So if you believe this industry or this section of bank has been attacked before, and you can research that, and they already know about, any other of the malwares, then, switch out that one and plug in the other one and see what the success rate is with that. FritzFrog, and I'm not trying to bore you all with all these examples. These are just the ones that pop in my head. FritzFrog is actually relatively new, and as far as I know, it's the only one that has been written in Golang. Golang has actually been developed by Google, and it actually doesn't run native, on the drive. There is no file on the drive. Once the infection happens, everything is done in memory. So It is completely modular. It's multi-threaded, so if you have multiple CPUs, it knows how to load across the CPUs. And every aspect of it is proprietary. So I personally haven't heard that the individuals have been identified, but whoever they are highly professional software developers, meaning they know what they're doing. And they are constantly updating. So FritzFrog actually gets everything from a proprietary command and control, and it communicates over its own peer-to-peer network. And it, when I say multi-threading, I mean it will run individual processes in memory, doing multiple things at once, just like any other program, even though it's not, hardware-based, it's not on a drive. Now, there's one flaw in FritzFrog, and that is that its proprietary peer-to-peer network is hard-coded, at least is as of the time of this writing, to run on an open SSH port. So it is encrypted communication, but it's still running on that port. And they're assuming that you're still running port 22, or you've tried to be tricky and make it 222. So if you block those ports to only authenticated devices, then FritzFrog may infect, but it will not be successful. Again, another mobile as a service malware. Cerberus, this actually came into being about February, March. Haven't seen much of it since April, but I'm sure it's still out there because these have been going offline for a while and then coming back online. This one is actually more worrisome to me because it actually includes a mobile device manager. So if your phone maybe was issued by your employer, then it's already sending SMS messages to get your two-factor credentials, store keys, log what you do on banking and financial applications that aren't associated with it. It will actually do money transfers. If it has access to the device and can transfer money out, it will certainly do that. And as I've shown in this picture here, it wants you to enable update. And so the only way to know if you're infected with this is if update is turned on and it's normally turned off, because it will do this in the background on its own once it has control of the mobile device. And just to help you out, get into advance, I pulled the list of recent malware apps on Google Play Store. So these are actually accurate as of the 24th. I'm sure by now that Google Play has blocked and removed all these, but unfortunately, if you've already installed the app, then you're still infected. So this is the list that was there. I know these slides will be loaded, so you can reference them later. But the most important thing to notice on here is that a lot of it has to do with PDF. And this goes back to the environment that we're in now. So a lot of companies will ask you to submit PDFs, but you may be able to print, but you can't scan the PDF. Well, the phone could do that for you by taking a picture. So all these apps, if you do that, then they've just captured a PDF of whatever you were working on.
Thank you, Jeff. Now that we have talked about how big cybercrime is, I think we also talked about the different threat avenues and the threat actors. Could you please share some insight around what can banking and financial organizations do to protect against and prevent cyber threats? Also, if you could share some best practices that have to be followed, that would also be good.
Definitely. So I already mentioned that things are pretty much different this year, and I think they're going to stay different. So when we have discussions with people, I mean, even here in Tokyo, we're really telling people that it's time to go back to basics. So you have an environment that was built prior to what we're facing now, prior to flattening the network, as you will. And so it's time to go back to defining what your risk is. Now, remember that I said that just about everything you have now is an endpoint. So your phone, your laptop, your home network, they've all suddenly become endpoints. And if you have people doing bring your own device, meaning they're using their own template, their own laptop, just connecting through VPN or whatever, it's still up to the business to define what the risk is and include those devices in any kind of assessment. So we're saying this is kind of a go back to basics. It may not be that severe for your organization, but it is very important to take a pause and redefine what your risk is. You need to understand, since the last point in time where you've had normal business operations, what are the things you're trying to protect? Keeping in mind that your data is going places it's never gone before, most likely. And then you need to measure the risk. How do we create a new sustainable process? And by sustainable, I mean, if you're in a permanent work from home situation now, like I said, about 60% of financial information is already mobile. But to maintain that information, to maintain the resources, maintain the network, and operate the business, those people just became equally as mobile. So your exposure window to threat is more than multiplied. And you need to also think about what abilities do you already have in-house and what abilities do you need in order to execute what you think needs to come next. And to do this, there's thankfully already a tool. So you're looking at the cybersecurity maturity model. But as you do, you need to make sure that the technologies that are in use are identified and the common elements and compliance requirements are identified for each and every one. And you need to compare your results with the industry. So it used to be, 10, 12 years ago that everything was siloed. So you had a banking system and your bank XYZ or financial company XYZ, you were worried about your risk, not the risk to your entire sector. And now it's been realized over the past 5 or 6 years that, you're better in groups. So there are CSO forums, there are CIO forums, there are CEO forums where you can go and, compare success and failure, learn what other organizations are using to defend themselves. Likewise, there are, CISSP groups where your people can go and have those discussions themselves. But the most important thing is that change comes from the top. And, it's no longer a here's money, go fix it type environment anymore. So after you do the comparison with industry, you need to talk to the information technology. And that's where you get a better understanding of what your physical presence is now, not what it used to be, but now. Unfortunately, that usually means doing inventory, and I know that's painful. But also with the new endpoint locations, you need to start doing additional log monitoring and finding out what's going on there. Because as we discussed, a lateral movement could have occurred. So for instance, if that person is on their iPhone or their iPad, and there was lateral movement with one of those apps that detects the operating system, yeah, you can track that to a point, but then it jumped over to another system. So if you're like any other organization, you probably have 25 different types of log monitors running. There has to be a way to identify this was infected, but then we lost track of it, but then we had this bad thing happen. So you need to be able to understand, everything about your network and where your logs are going and how they're being processed. And then you need to identify your adversary. So not everybody out there, not every cyber criminal, not everybody, not every advanced persistent threat is after your jewels. So again, this backs to having the discussion at the various forums online to understand, what you're building and why you're building it and who might be after it. And the last thing is most organizations, as of right now, may have threat hunting, but they obviously have to retool how they threat hunt based on, the various and sundry ways that cybercrime is happening in today's market. So going back to the cybersecurity model, after you do this assessment, you need to figure out where you were, because chances are where you were is not where you are now. I have been talking with people who say, well, we're definitely level 3, we're defined, and this is what we're doing. And then we get to the part where it says across the organization, inclusive of third parties. And that's where it begins to fall down. Because you have to remember your third parties are doing the same thing you just had to do. So they've opened their endpoints, they flattened their network. And how much risk does that impose on you, especially as a financial organization who's working mobilely and has mobile applications on top of it? So, and if you were level 2, chances are you stayed at level 2. Your processes are repeatable. You just don't have full understanding of what your network is now. And your measurements are going to be off. I could be wrong, but chances are they're going to be off. And doubtful the level 1s and level 0s, have any effect whatsoever. It's going to be in the 2s, 3s, and 4s where, you believe you're managed, defined, and repeatable. But those things that are repeatable, managed, and defined have changed. So from a takeaway standpoint, again, I already said it, that cybersecurity comes from the top. It's even more important now than ever before that it does. And the goal is not to create the fear climate, be watchful of everything and jump on everything that moves. It's a nuanced awareness at the C level to know this is my industry and these are the types of tracks that come to my industry. Likewise, pay attention to what's been reporting in the media. Have weekly discussions with the cyber team combined with the information technology team, because you talk about the cyber team as if they're separate, and in many cases they are, but the log analysis, the log information is going to come from IT. So you also need to build awareness inside the organization with other contacts, and I already said that. Talking about what's important, what's good, what doesn't work, and make plans based on that information. That can also be talked about, in-house as far as the staff training and the cybersecurity model, and making sure people's certs remain current. That's another, downside of what's going on in the past year is that classes have all been online, and some people just don't learn online very well, especially when it comes to a certification. You need to be able to touch it. And so taking that into account as the plans for 2021 go forward, there has to be some money spent on training. And you also need to know, across the board, and I already said that your old risk model is out the window. So spending some time knowing what the attacks are and going into what cyber criminals are doing are going to affect your patch management system. And as I put on here, this year Microsoft has released 1,000 critical vulnerabilities. Most of them have been, the system is scored between 1 and 10. hardly anything has been lower than a 5. And in the last 110 patches that were announced in September, I want to say about 40% of them were score 8 or higher, meaning they're approaching red. So how are all these CVEs being processed inside your systems with most of the people working from home? So it's almost become, a patch every day type thing, which no financial institution wants to be involved in. Also to consider, since we were talking about understanding your endpoints. So I'm not a person who buys a new phone every time the new one comes out. I'm sure a lot of people aren't. But like I said, a lot of people are using your banking application. A lot of employees are using their emails and connectivity from their phone. One of the things to consider is what's the life cycle of a device? What's the life cycle of protection for that device? So if you're currently carrying one of the 200 million iPhone 6 and 6 Plus units, they're not being patched by Apple anymore. Like I said here, they were dumped into the OS limbo last September. And so patches are only being offered to iOS 13.5 on an iPhone, which those phones are impossible of operating. Likewise on Samsung. Samsung has performed only 2 major OS updates to Android phones, and the last ones to Galaxy S9 and S9 Plus have been done. So if you're running Android 8, Android 9, or even Android 10 after the end of this year, then there are no patches. So either your phone operator needs to be doing the patches for you, or they're just not being done. So when you develop more mobile apps and do mobile app upgrades, that puts more onus on you to do mobile app device security checking, because the operator or the OS for the phone isn't going to catch it for you. And going on with key takeaways, the good detection system is much. So if you go back to, sorry to roll back so many slides. If you go back to this, I noted that there were 3, possibly 4 places where the kill change could have taken place and the infection wouldn't have happened. So when you're doing analysis of the new organization to your network, understanding where your points already are, understanding the new threats that are continuously evolving this year. Part of this is understanding where your crown jewels are. So how far do you let them go in a certain segment of your network before you stop them? And right along with this is the user education. So many of the large cyber crimes have actually happened in accounting. And in one instance, there was a user who received an email, and it's one of those work all day long, work all night type situations now in some cases, especially in accounting. This woman received a notice that one of the bills hadn't been paid. So she responded to it later in that evening saying, really sorry I haven't got to this. As soon as I get free, we'll do it. So a couple hours go by, person responds and says, hey, we really need to take care of this because you're already 30 days past due. Well, she's not paying attention to what's going on. So rather than paying, through the normal pay cycle, the person on the other end says, oh, well, this could be done with a wire transfer and then I will stop bugging you. So she put all the information out there and did the wire, and then about a week and a half later, they realized that she was talking to not an employee and not a third party. But by then it was too late. So you also need to know, and this goes back into talking about who's who. So also during the COVID situation, employees have probably come and gone, third-party contractors have probably come and gone, but those accounts are still going to be out there. So one thing you can do, especially during a work from home situation, is do account management. And if it hasn't already been done, then that's probably the first thing you need to do. And especially accounts with critical systems. And while you're doing it, make sure that all the passwords, and I mean all the passwords, are rotated before the end of the year or sooner. So this leaves us to, what does the future look like? So, like I've said many times during this presentation, 2020 has changed everything. So what you need to look at whenever you're doing the planning for the next year, because end of year, end of quarters coming up, look at the behavior data for everybody who's been working. Look at the new endpoints. Look at the new mobile devices. We already talked about the ones that are going out of service or no longer patched. So you now have bring your own device is probably a part of your environment, but you also probably need to place restrictions on the bring your own device, and not from just a cybersecurity standpoint, but from a hardware standpoint. You're going to have more analytics to deal with, especially if you have threat hunters already in your payroll. Their job just got very hard. So the important thing that I put here is graph. So when you're dealing with the C-level or director level people, they don't want you to just say, we were hacked and this is what we think happened. No, it's going to be a graphs, metrics. This is what we're going to do to respond. You know, when you communicate up, the C-level is going to expect you to communicate well. And that's in a lot of times in other instances where I've been involved where things kind of go downhill because, you know, you're talking with people you wouldn't normally talk with and you're not sure what they like as far as communication and your time strained. So getting some help, maybe Sparity to come in and help you with that is a good idea, especially when it's time critical and you want to keep with that 76-day detection window and get things moving along. I mentioned machine learning. So when we talk about machine learning and AI, so I don't know from a cybercrime standpoint, but definitely from a nation state standpoint, AI has become a big thing. And, you know, as you already mentioned during the introduction, I used to work counterintelligence and actually work counterintelligence over here in Asia. And, you know, I spent some time detained in China when I crossed the border, getting asked questions over and over again. And it took me a long time to realize that they actually knew who I was because OPM had been hacked a year and a half earlier. And they had taken that information, gone out to Facebook, other sources, and then compiled bios on everybody. And now those bios are actually loaded into AI. So when they're thinking about talking with somebody or they're thinking about attacking a company, they can pretty much track where that person works now. So when we talked to him last, or we saw him last, he was over here in company A. Oh, look, he's in this financial company now doing the same thing. So we have become very easy to track because we have a very social footprint out there with, you know, Facebook and other organizations. So that said, efficient prevention, detection, and remediation are going to keep you at that fast response time. Unfortunately, with network flattened, that means a lot of updates, a lot of remediation for your help desk engineers because they're getting called with information that they probably don't have a script for. And then you're going to have to evolve continuously. So this is where having good threat hunting is going to be key. So threat hunting and analytics, eventually over millions of devices, not maybe with your organization, but think about Internet of Things. So you have somebody working from home, probably with at least 5 remote devices already, and then they apply Internet of Things to the household as well. So now you have more security vulnerabilities, especially if those IoT devices are bought remotely and shipped. When I was with CenturyLink, we had one employee who was actually very good with cybersecurity. He wasn't a cyber person, but he kept seeing that some data was being exfiltrated from his house over his home network. And it took him forever to realize that it was his camera that he had bought online. And it was actually sending pictures to some unknown place over in Asia somewhere. And, I beat the threat hunting, to the floor, but it's a must-have now. And the reason why is, one of the recent things that I discovered is this is banking company A and financial company A. I was doing some browsing for this research and came across the fact that all this information is available in the near dark web. So you can pick just about any financial company that you want, any banking company you want, and on a daily basis, nearly hourly basis, they have documented the threats for your organization, and these are only web interface threats for your organization, and published it. And you don't have to pay for it, you just got to go looking for it. So I picked one banking company, one finance company, and you can see the issues with their web interface, right off the bat. So that helps you with your targeting and reconnaissance right away.
Jeff, thank you so much. That was a lot of information shared. Could you now talk about how Sparity helps our customers in this space of cybersecurity and areas where we can add value with threat actors and the different type of threats?
Certainly. So, as you already introduced, Sparity is a 10-year-old company. And I'm sorry, we have an auto scroll problem. Very sorry about that. So we are a 10-year-old company, and we maintain certified security people and engineers. I'm not going to go running through all the credentials, but it's very important to us that the people stay current and move forward in their own career and their own education, because that helps us help you. So my experience has been in the not so much incident response, but in vulnerability testing and tabletop exercises. A lot of that experience for me comes from working with NCIS and being here overseas. So we have a lot of talent engineers. We have dealt with a lot of small, medium-sized businesses, as well as technology startups. And we always take into account the engagement, what the customer wants, but also while you're going through, in many aspects, people don't realize what they need as much as what they want. So from an advisory standpoint, and having dealt with many business organizations, there are basics. So we can come to the organization and help you take a look at, what your infrastructure security looks like, what your network security looks like, what your cloud security looks like, mainly from an AWS standpoint, when you're talking about cloud security, and also where your application security is. And that's just not web application security, that's mobile device apps too. And, there are many common vendors that we deal with as well. So Imperva, Cisco, Palo Alto, everybody who does any type of deep cybersecurity work is very familiar with Splunk. I myself deal with, the Asian organizations. So we recently have a contract agreement with the Ministry of Education in Cambodia, which unfortunately is put on hold because of COVID. And consulting and analysis. So I already mentioned, here we go with the Sorry about that. So vulnerability scanning and assessment. This is pretty much a CMM level 2. So we can help identify complex security vulnerabilities based on your organization and tailored to your organization. There's never anything that's, that's quote unquote out of the book. Cyber attack simulation. This I actually perform a lot and gain the experience working within CIS over here in Asia. There's an exercise called Ultra Freedom Guardian, which is all of the Asian nations participate in a simulated attack by North Korea. And so a lot of that is involved in tabletop security analysis. Obviously, there are people out there with guns, tanks, boats, but from a cybersecurity standpoint, it was tabletop exercise between North and South Korea and how that played out. And if you're at a CMM level 2, looking to move to a level 3, cyber attack simulation is a good way to get there, because when you do get to 3 plus, you're going to be into pen testing. And so the actual tabletop exercise helps you help your team moving to the next level. And from a pen testing standpoint, we have the capability of doing it in the United States. But I always caution that doing it inside the United States is not as realistic as having somebody from overseas do it, because chances are cybercrime or the nation states, if involved, are always going to be overseas, and they're always going to do the reconnaissance from overseas, looking at your information, looking at your employees, looking at ways in. And I myself have been involved in a bank that was actually physical penetration testing as well as testing. And last, we talked about IoT devices. So there was a demonstration recently dealing with coffee makers, and anybody who works with IT or cybersecurity knows how important coffee is. So this coffee maker is an IoT device, therefore it had wireless, so it was actually a victim of cybercrime, and they demanded a ransom to get the coffee machine working again, and that's just terrible. So I say pay it. And that being said, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate all the insights and information you have shared. Let's look at some of the questions I think we have received. The first question we have here is, what experience does Parity have in providing solutions for cyber threats in banking and financial institutions?
That's a good question. As I already mentioned it, one of the most important thing is going to be, setting base 0 again. So going through, what you consider the core of the organization, and looking at how to protect it based on the architecture of the organization and how you perceive where your security should be. Part of that is going to be doing the vulnerability assessment and the penetration test. And like I already said, 60% of banking and finance is on a mobile device. So assessing mobile device security and helping you understand the threat, especially from work from home for your employees, because there are several requirements that are going to expand from your organization now to the home and mobile office, and that includes anything that your core, your headquarters, or your branches were subject to. Now the home is a branch as well. So helping you organize, communicate, and articulate that to the people who need to know.
Thank you, Jeff. We have a second question here. Does Parity provide cybersecurity consulting services to assess maturity in the cybersecurity space?
Yes, and that pretty much goes back to my previous long-winded answer. So if you have, if you're one of those organizations who was a 3 and who is now a 2.5, it's going to be pretty hard to meet the needs of the organization as it stands right now in the timeline that you have been given. So in many cases, PCI DSS, HIPAA compliance, it depends on your organization, but you've only been given, a reprieve till the end of the year. So hitting the road first quarter, those things are going to have to be done. And we do have the experience to help you move the program forward and make it compliant again. Kishore?
Yeah, so the next question we have here is, can you assess our entire value chain and present a recommendation plan if there is any recommendations that need be?
Yes. So if by value chain you mean what's needs the most securing within the organization and creating a vulnerability and risk management program for what is highly valued, most definitely. If I have misunderstood that question, then please go ahead and clarify.
Okay. And the last question is, what are the best practices to be followed?
That is a very broad question, but there are several resources for learning best practices. The MITRE threat information is out there. There are also best practices that have been offered by us and other organizations. But basically, the best practice that you have right now is, again, understanding what's important to your organization, understanding what the new work environment has done to your organization. And as I said before, you need to, go through and make sure that your key systems are patched. The one thing that I didn't mention here is, I mentioned Microsoft had issued over 1,000 for the year. Is many network devices have also fallen behind. So Palo Alto, Cisco Wireless, they've all issued high warnings for patches that need to be conducted. So most importantly is, again, understanding your devices, making sure they're patched, and coming up with a plan and critical infrastructure plan for the coming year.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I don't have any additional questions. Well, on behalf of Sparity, thank everyone for joining this webinar. We appreciate your time. I hope we were able to provide some insight in terms of cybersecurity and what you as banking and financial institutions need to do. We will update this webinar as part of our website at www.sparity.com and would be available for all of you to download. If you have any additional questions for us, you can reach out to Jeff based on the information that is available on the slide. And we thank you for your time again. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. And I will just add to that, I am in Asia, so currently 13 hours ahead, depending on where you are. So please don't get mad at me if I don't respond very quickly, because the time difference. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.